The ringing of steel and the wailing of suffering souls was replaced by perfect silence. Trembling winds of one frowning meadow drifted through scores of dead bodies as if carefully beckoning them to wake up from their eternal slumber, and the first ravens of death were already announcing their sad arrival. In that dark afternoon there were thousands dead lying upon that land. The surrounding nature, as if ashamed by the cruelty it has witnessed, laid a long shadow on the bloody scene and silently awaited the storm clouds to wash its shame away. The silence wasn't even broken by the victorious warriors, bloodied head to toe on their walk of death, finishing off the deadly injured with a merciful stab through the hearts of the damned. An even greater silence enveloped a stern commander, marked by countless fights on his scar-ridden face and soul as he was staring down a familiar sight, the result of going to war. He sat upon a large stone on a bloody mound from which he sent his warriors into the pointed spears of the enemy with a last-ditch hope that their losses would outweigh his. Weighing fates of other men could only be done with a blindfold over one's conscience, by becoming an animal of war born to fight with the ferocious efficiency of a predator. The commander was no animal, however. The blindfold would as always slip from his eyes after the fight, and devoid of tears he could only stare on the tragedy of human lives that he himself ended in blood and gore, the same lives he saw laughing and cheering in the flickering light of the campfire only the previous evening. He erased those smiles forever when he placed their fate on the great scale of human fate and pushed. His protege, a young captain, learning the ways of the war, climbed up towards the giant rock where in silent contemplation sat his old mentor. The young man had 1,000 questions on his tongue, and his heart still beat to the victorious drumbeat of the recently fought battle. He sat to the side of the old man and tried to guess what his old master was thinking by looking in the general direction his gaze was transfixed towards. All he saw, however, was a triumph of his very first battle. Banners of lords of faraway lands were lazily swinging in the light breeze of the dark meadow in the dying embers of their recent glory. Some were torn apart by slashing and swinging, others were impregnated and colored by blood of men on both sides of the battle lines. They were waving low to the ground, broken in half or impaled in the body of those that will never get to harvest whatever they sowed. The young captain was playing with the idea of collecting all those banners and burning them in a great fire dedicated to his victory. His men would watch and cheer his glory, they would chant death to the enemies and forever remember the victory that was got on this land baptized by blood. Where would his mentor look then? The minutes on the somber rock the two men sat on were passing 5 times slower than the minutes in battle. The silence on the meadow seemed eternal, and so deafening that even the thunderous sounds of battle died down in the ears of the young captain. He kept staring in the same direction as his mentor, and the reality of a battle's aftermath slowly started seeping in. Behind his attack lay terrible waste, a sea of immovable faces that used to laugh, weep, shout, and cheer, donning lifeless eyes that would never stare to the horizon in wonder. He saw bodies that were devoid of souls and the warmth of life, filled with a never-ending darkness. He gazed at sparkless eyes, wordless mouths, gripless hands, airless chests, and unmoving legs. And the fear was back. The old warrior kept an eye on his impatient student. He knew the expression on his face. An entire age of wars clouded his memory of the very first battle he ever fought, but that feeling that he now saw in his protege was difficult to forget. Like any old man of war, he still felt a bit of shame over the naivety he felt charging into his first battle line and the foolish romanticism with which he decapitated his enemies, pierced their armor, and broke their teeth. 5 blood-soaked battles it took before he realized the devastation he left in his wake. His realization was, however, always supplemented by the pride he felt in the ovation of others. He watched the young man and saw the temerity he so hated in his younger self. dark curtain still held over the silent landscape, and the wind started to rise. It whistled through the dead helms and the cold steel, singing the last march of those that will never march again. 2 warriors sat on a stone rising over that day's victory. Whatever the numbers of the dead were, however, in the commander's heart, it was a Pyrrhic victory. He looked again at the young captain and began understanding. The weight on his heart increased as he saw the sadness and contemplation in the young man's eyes. A young, pristine heart started to get shadowed by its first bruises. The captain no longer wanted to look upon his victorious field, but now he couldn't look away. He did not know what to do with himself. His arms began to feel as if absorbed of sin, and his legs wanted to run from what he had done. The sweet victory started to taste bitter. Their eyes met after seeing the somber battlefield. The young man finally saw the 100-year-strong sadness in the soul of his mentor, a sadness that only started developing in his heart. The commander saw the first pains of conscience and a deep uncertainty in the eyes of his companion. They sat on the same battlefield, but their wars were still different. The commander was a true warrior in his heart, one that is eternally grateful to his enemies, who carries no hate on his shoulders and who doesn't attack with spite. He loved his brothers from the shield wall, even from times long gone, in spite of any conflict or betrayals, and he also loved those who fought against him and fell. His was a tragic love of life and a never-ending gratitude for all that was in it. It was a true love of a warrior. Heartaches of the old mentor were spread out on battlefields of many lands. They were like lakes that can drown a person but also bring life, peace, and an awesome understanding for all those that live in it. When he silently watched the piles of dead bodies in front of him, he saw deep into that lake, a depth he acquired from long years of battling pride, understanding, and woe for the dead he left in his wake. They were the years that the young captain had to suffer to see as deep as he could. Two men that will never again know innocence sat together in silence after the storm, engaged in a wordless conversation and a common sadness. The young captain was again thinking of his heroic charge that finally turned the tides of the battle. He still felt pride for that attack, but now, in the shadow of his mentor, he also felt ashamed. He knew his words well, words the old commander would utter his way whenever he caught him in his dreamy outlook on battle and war. He now saw the devastation of what he assumed was nothing but endless hate between thousands of men, and imagined what the commander would be saying to him had he not been so silent. Had he talked, he would surely point to the blood-soaked ground and the ever-present death on the battlefield, and give in stark contrast to the romantic outlook on battling one's enemy that he believed the young captain still harbored. But the commander didn't say any of that. Instead, he stayed silent like the field in front of them, which finally knew harmony and peace again, but for a terrible price that the captain only now started to understand. Or so he thought. Time slowly passed as ravens descended onto the bodies below. They pecked into eye holes and they pecked at tongues, just as the young captain's conscience pecked at him. His mentor saw the growing sadness inside his apprentice, but he knew he could only sit and wait till the grief either breaks him or forever strengthens his faith. He might have seemed deep in thought on that barren stone he sat upon, but he already did all the thinking in his life. Now he only sat in silent respect for all his enemies. Battle continued to brew inside the young captain's heart. He would be condemned to fight many of these inner battles from this day on, but he didn't know that yet. He tried to overcome the bitterness of all those ruined lives and find meaning in their end, but he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to find any. He wondered what higher power sent him to kill these men today, and whether it was perhaps the same one that sent them too. This questioning of his own faith made him tremble more than any foe he ever stood against, and lived, feeling blow after blow with every look on all those that he killed that day. Burying his head into the hilt of his sword, he fell deeper and deeper into the darkness of uncertainty and faithlessness, until the hand of his mentor grabbed him out. He put his hand on the young captain's shoulder only for a heartbeat, but it was enough to drag him back to the world of the living. The young man survived the first crisis of his faith that day, but he could already guess this wouldn't be his last. In the horror of that day, he managed to learn a lot, but he did not yet feel the true love of a warrior.